Steals and saves, everybody's favorite categories. Happy Kokomo Friday here on Fantasy Baseball today, June 12th. Frank Stanfield along with Pocket Aces, Adam Mazer, Scotty Dubs, Scott White, and CPT, Chris Towers. Guys, I'm in a great mood today. And the main reason was I took out my trash. And I realized that summer is basically here. I don't know about you guys, but I am a big fan of the warm weather.
Yeah. Well, so you like what? What does that have to do with your trash? Like you have a calendar in the trash that had the start of summer?
No, I took the trash out and I realized that the weather was nice. There are days where I just don't go outside now because of the shop.
I figured that you lived in an apartment and you threw it down a chute.
No, I live in a basement, so I have to bring it outside.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it is nice out. Welcome to the outside world.
No.
Chris, not a fan of the summer.
I mean, I guess, okay, so this is the first time I'm actually experiencing a summer that will end eventually. So like maybe that novelty will help. But, growing up in South Florida, 31 years, I'm a larger person. I generate a lot of body heat already. I'm hairy. And so the summer is just a disaster for me. It really I'm just like a walking, I don't even know how to describe it in a way that won't really turn everyone off from the podcast. But needless to say, the summer months do not treat me well. And so maybe knowing that by mid-August, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, it'll start to cool down. And then it's like, oh, well, okay, yeah, that's fine. We've got
August is much better in New York than Florida.
Well,
Florida August is hell.
July is probably the only month in New York where it's as bad as Florida, because Florida doesn't really get hot.
Listen. As somebody who's only lived in South Florida 13 years now, so not the 31 years you lived here, Chris, but long enough that I would have gotten tired of it if I was going to get tired of it. I never want to go back. I never want to go back to ever experiencing cold weather.
Scott, you're a skinny little thing. You're all skin and bones and sinew.
That's exactly that's how it's supposed to work, Scott. You're absolutely right.
No,
and I grew up in Georgia, so it never even got. I mean, it gets down to freezing in the winter, but not for months at a time. It's going back to visit family and experiencing it all over again. It felt 100 times worse than I remembered it.
I didn't mind it so much. Adam gave me a weird look when I said South Florida doesn't get that hot. The relative temperature in South Florida during the summer months is actually very comparable to most of the East Coast,
where it gets extremely hot.
Right, but it gets the average high in South Florida is usually 89 to 90 degrees. The problem is it's 8 million % humidity, and it's 9 months of 88 to 90 degrees.
Just absolutely gross.
It gets to 92 in the summer. It's humid. It stinks. No offense. I live here now. It's just, you got trash all over the sidewalks. It's kind of how this place works. And so that's pretty miserable. July is I've been here in July several times. It's tough, but
All right, well,
it's fine.
We're not going to talk about weather in the summer for the entirety of the podcast today on the show. We're going to give you some sleepers in the steals and saves categories. Plus, we have a mini mailbag later on in the show. But first, I have a bold prediction for you guys. Are you ready?
Yes.
No.
All right,
Yeah.
Adam's not ready. All right, Adam's ready. We'll do it now. By this time Monday, June 15th, I predict MLB will have a season announced. Boom goes the dynamite. That one's for you, Scott.
Oh, yeah.
That's
that was reported.
John Heyman said the time is that who you're talking about? That's who reported it, Chris, or did you see it somewhere else?
I think it was John Heyman. It might have been someone else. I think I saw you quote tweet them. So
yeah, I quote tweeted John Heyman, and he said likely if there's not an agreement in the next 5 days, it's likely that Rob Manfred would enforce the approximately 50 game schedule. So the wording there, I mean, I'm not sure how official that is. I'm not sure if it's just John Heyman theorizing himself or if he's actually heard something. But yeah, that's the closest thing to a timeline I've seen so far. So, maybe not necessarily Monday afternoon, but early next week.
All right, maybe not so bold.
I'll just Frank, I thought you were going to say you were excited at the top of the show because the Pokemon expansion is coming next week.
Well, that too, but I wasn't going to really reveal my Pokemon fandom on the podcast.
Just live it, own it, man. It's who you are. It's part of you.
I have no problem with that whatsoever. But I don't think anyone wants to hear about Pokemon. I think they want to hear about steals, and they want to hear about saves. So let's jump in. The most fun categories of all time. Last year, 2,280 stolen bases were the lowest since 1994. In 2019, you needed about 150 steals to finish first place in that category in a 12-team Roto League. That averages out to almost 11 steals per starting hitter. It's like 10.7. There were just 8 players with 30-plus steals last season. There were 21 with 20 or more steals. That includes the likes of Jerrod Dyson, Delino Deshields, Billy Hamilton, Manuel Margot, likely players who were not in your lineup. For reference, in 2018, there were 3 more players with 30 or more stolen bases. There were 7 more with 20 or more steals. All right, Scott, kick us off here. Steals, we've talked all about them for the past, 6 months, basically, as long as we've been prepping for the fantasy baseball season. We know that they're scarce. How are you attacking the category? And is it possible to find sleepers in this category anymore?
It is. It is. Yeah, I think it is. But it's not people you could call sleepers with a high degree of confidence, I would say, because who knows how things are going to continue to trend from here. I assume steals are going to continue to fall. You mentioned it was the lowest since 1994. 1994 was the strike shortened season, only 114 games long. So for a full length season, I'm not sure, I could look this up quickly, but I would suspect it's probably the fewest stolen bases ever. And what we're seeing.
That's why you're smarter than me, Scott, because I didn't even remember that there was a strike shortened season. But I will look it up while you're talking.
About 114 games, 94.
Yeah. So yeah, the way we're seeing people approach it in rotisserie leagues is obviously the guys that you can depend on stealing bases, particularly if they do anything else, are going very early. It's a category that needs to be addressed early because the kind of people who could still contribute to it late, like that list you rattled off at the beginning, Frank, you really don't want any part of them based on how they're going to bring you down elsewhere. So, like, you're not going to find a guy who delivers like a 40 steal pace out of nowhere. If somebody is a stolen base sleeper, it's because they might eke out 20 in a full season in a way that goes overlooked. Somebody like Nick Senzel, or somebody like I guess even somebody like Aristides Aquino. He was 7 for 7 with a little bit of time up. Maybe he could do something like that. And then, that's 20 steal pace you're talking about in a full season. The way that could get, what that would translate to in a 50-game season or something much shorter than a full-length season, you're talking like somebody who gives you 5, 6, 7 steals. That's what you're looking at as a sleeper. And that could, that makes for a wider range of possible players who could do that, but it also makes it even less predictable because it's likely the guys we were counting on giving stolen bases just go a couple weeks without steals, since it's not a high threshold we're talking about having to be met over a full-length season, and then where are you? So yeah, it's not a category you want to fill late for sure.
All right, I think I have the answer on the season that had the fewest stolen bases. Was 1973 a shortened season?
No, but the league has added 4 teams, if not more.
All right.
Since then, I think the expansion was 67. And then was there another one between that and 94?
No, there was 1973 was the lowest before 1994. 1981? How about that?
That was a strike shortened season, yes.
All right, so 2019 basically in the modern day has produced the lowest level of steals that we've seen in fantasy baseball. And we talk about this a lot. When it comes to steals, they are not a correlated stat with anything else. They're an individual stat and largely produced by motivation I mean, it's hard to project steals. It just comes down to are managers going to allow their players to run? Do the guys want to run? Because we know that there's a lot of players that are capable of stealing bases, but this is just such an odd category for fantasy. But it is part of the traditional 5x5, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. So we've got to learn to kind of cope and adjust with where stolen bases are at right now.
And it shouldn't go away. It's a really difficult challenge, but
You're right.
it's part of it, and it's frustrating. But could you imagine playing without steals? That's so weak. That's so like eliminate tight end. No,
Yeah, it's just
I agree.
draft the guys. It's basically draft the guys who hit the most home runs if you eliminate steals. That takes away a lot of the strategy of building a 5x5 team. And just 2019 had almost 200 fewer stolen bases than 2018. Since the league became a 30-team league, it's by far the lowest. 2019 and 2018 are the first years below 2,500.
but if the ball changes and they hit fewer home runs, then maybe we see it's not like they're going to be abundant. There's still going to be scarcity, but maybe it goes back to like 2018 levels.
Yeah, extra base hits take away from stolen base opportunities.
Yeah.
All right, so let's look into some of those potential steals sleepers here, Scott. I know that you've been writing articles all week long, CBSSports.com, that have basically accompanied these podcasts. So, I mean, who did you find when it comes to stolen bases?
Well, so like I said, it's more players who could maybe deliver a 20 steals pace over a full season than like a 30 or 40 steals pace. And if you can find somebody who could deliver that more closer to elite pace, then you're probably sacrificing a lot elsewhere. I'm thinking of guys like Malik Smith and Jerrod Dyson of the Pirates, who should play close to every day for them. They would fit into that category. A guy like John Birdie also would fit into that category. I don't think he brings much to the table other than stolen bases, but I think he'll play a lot for the Marlins. And, based on what he did in limited time last year and throughout the minor league career, he should run a lot. A guy like Garrett Hampson might fit into that category, but I do have more hope for upside from him as a hitter, especially in terms of like batting average and runs scored, depending where he bats in the Rockies lineup. Somebody like Lorenzo Cain, who's going 182nd overall, he could get back to more like a 25-30 steals pace after he stole, I think it was 18 last year. But in a down year for him in terms of batting average, getting on base, and it doesn't seem like the skill set is actually diminished much there. Another sleeper who could maybe give you a lot of steals is Nick Madrigal, but that's dependent on when he enters the White Sox lineup and how much they let him run. Historically, they haven't been a team that have let some of their big minor league base stealers continue to do that in the majors. And that's about it in terms of really impactful steals production from late rounders. Maybe Byron Buxton, if he stays healthy, though, his game, there's enough power in his game that I'm not totally sure last year's half season pace would translate to a full season. But yeah, then after that, you're looking at guys like I said, Nick Senzel, Gene Segura, the hope he bounces back with a pace closer to what he was delivering before Gabe Kapler was his manager. Scott Kingery probably could give you that 20 steals pace. Kyle Tucker has a chance to for the Astros, depending on how much he plays. Will Myers is actually, I think, a good one. I don't expect a huge steals total from him, but he's just so far down in ADP. He's going 270th overall, and I don't think there's really any reason to worry about the playing time with the DH coming to the NL.
And he's been a consistent 20 steal guy, at least pacing out to, 600 plate appearances basically throughout his career, even when things have gone poorly.
Yep. So I think he's being overlooked for that. I mentioned Aquino, who might be for the same reason, just no faith in the playing time. And even with the DH, it's not clear how much Aristides Aquino would play, because there's also finding time for Jesse Winker and Nick Senzel. So that could remain an issue. Sam Hilliard's kind of in that same boat. I think he could be a pretty good steal source, but how much he's going to play. Dylan Carlson kind of the same way.
Is anybody like Kevin Newman?
Yeah, I was going to
Not-
bring him up. I think
Not really.
I think Kevin Newman is interesting.
Yeah, look, I mean, batting average and steals last year. He had a 28 steal season in the minors. He played like 130 games last year and had like 16 steals or something. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's
Not
quite-
nothing, 16, but
well, but that's 130 games, so he could definitely get to 20, and he's going to potentially lead off or bat second in the Pirates lineup. He goes after the 200th pick. He's a little outside the top 200. I think it's very possible that he just has like a horrible year and doesn't hit well. But if you get a guy who does what he did last year, batted 308 with 16 steals, and he also hits toward the top of the order, he might be able to score 90 runs. Kevin Newman's worth a look.
Yeah, I think there are other names even beyond that. First of all, there are some higher, like, we can define the question in a couple ways. And one way is higher end guys who are not sleepers, but have some sleeper potential for stolen bases. And so I would say David Dahl, someone we talked about the other day, who said he wants to run more. Yohan Moncada is another guy who has talked about wanting to run more. And then the White Sox have talked about wanting him to run more. The biggest issue for him, he's got like 74th percentile sprint speed on StatCast. The biggest issue for him is he's had these constant recurring hamstring injuries that he did work out this year, trying to focus on becoming more flexible to avoid that. If that happens, he was a 60 steal guy in the minors per 150 games. There's, really 30 steal potential there, I think, fairly easily if he decides to do it. I'll also throw out then some lower end guys who need playing time, but could get to 25 to 30 steals if they get it. Someone like Ender Inciarte. I'm not sure he's going to play all that regularly, but if he does, he's a stolen base threat for sure. Delino Deshields, another guy that Frank mentioned earlier in the season. I'm not sure he deserves to be an everyday player, but especially if you played in an OBP league and he does play pretty regularly, he could be a 30 steal pace guy who doesn't kill you in on base percentage because he does draw walks fairly regularly.
I just want to throw Kyle Tucker in there. Sorry.
Yeah. He was a 30 steal pace guy in
he and
AAA.
David Dahl are the two. I love drafting them. Love drafting both of them.
Yeah, Ender Inciarte is a good call. We haven't really talked much about him, and we've mentioned Austin Riley being a huge beneficiary of the universal DH, but I think those two kind of go hand in hand because if Austin Riley can play DH, then that means Ender Inciarte can play in the outfield. So I think that's a good call and a name that we haven't really brought up here. I have some deeper names that I'll just kind of like throw out there, and you guys can. I'll throw the name. You could say whether or not you're interested or not. Kevin Kiermaier.
Mildly.
Yeah, there's
really
just
not.
There's so many guys in Tampa Bay.
Kolten
It's
Wong.
hard to see him playing every day.
And not
Is it
enough
though?
stolen base upside to justify the hitting downside.
But he's like one of the best center fielders in baseball. So wouldn't he be someone that actually would play close to every day, if not every day?
I think the
Maybe.
plan is for him and Margot to split.
Yeah, they did trade for Emmanuel
No.
Margot.
All right, then no.
Yeah, 19
No.
steals for Kiermaier last year. He's hovered between 15 and 20 the past couple of seasons, and even in some shortened seasons too. 16 and 98 games.
You've got to have deep lineups to even think about players like this because
Oh yeah, these are deeper names.
They hit so, but it's not just like you've got to start a lot of players because they're such bad hitters. And maybe Kiermaier, you could make a case that Kiermaier, when he's healthy, is actually a decent hitter. But Delino Deshields is a bad hitter.
I'm pretty sure I didn't see Kiermaier or Deshields drafted for a starting spot in any of my 15-team 5 outfielder leagues. Like maybe on the bench, but not as a starter.
I will say one name that Frank said, who's not a horrible hitter, is Kolten Wong.
Yeah,
He doesn't have the power that we kind of hoped he would grow into, but he's hit 285 2 of the last 3 seasons. He stole 24 bases. The stolen bases were kind of an outlier for him, but I put together this tool that I'm going to try to find a way to put out for people. I'm not sure exactly how yet, but basically you can search for a player and it'll show you kind of their projected range of outcomes. And I had initially talked about doing it just for batting average, but I did kind of figure out a way to do it for every stat. And for Kolten Wong, his range of outcomes for batting average and stolen bases, even in a 50-game season, because he does draw walks, he could be a 10 steal guy in a 50-game season if, things go right for him.
Yeah, I like Wong for this. He's actually one of the 10 I mentioned in the column. I limit myself to only 10, and Wong is one of them. 24 out of 28 last year, and you mentioned he didn't develop the power we hoped he would. It looks like he finally determined last year that he doesn't need to be a power hitter. The way his batted ball profile changed over the course of the season, and he hit like 350 in the second half. I mean, obviously I don't expect him to do that over a full season, but it was just, it was a committing to, it seemed like he was committing to being a certain type of player that might end up being more appropriate for his skill set and could make him more of a fantasy asset because of it.
Yeah, he did, though. Kolten Wong stole 21 bases in 356 games in the 3 seasons before 2019. This is why it's tough. As you said, Frank, it's a tough stat to project, and it makes you wonder if you really should be taking Trey Turner 7th overall or something like that. I mean, I'm in on that, but if he doesn't steal bases, if he's going to steal some bases, but if he's not a great base stealer, how can you justify taking him over Freddie Freeman, Nolan Arenado, like these guys who are just much, much better hitters? Because in terms of just like OPS, he's going to be one of the worst first-round hitters, if not the worst first-round hitter, Trey Turner. So, I'll do it, but there's definitely some risk there, because if he doesn't, and they were talking about batting him 3rd potentially.
Yeah, that's not going to happen, though. The one thing he does have going for him, I think as spring training went on, they seemed pretty much certain that he was going to be moving, staying in the leadoff spot. So I think that concern, because his stolen bases have been very dependent on where he hit in the lineup, but it does sound like he's going to be hitting leadoff. And as long as that's the case, I still expect, maybe the 70 steal pace that we once dreamed of is probably gone, but
right.
I would still think like a 40 steal pace.
Yeah, which is more bad news for Victor Robles, because that likely pushes him down the lineup. I'd have to imagine Adam Eaton batting 2nd there for the Washington Nationals. I'll just throw out a few deep names quickly. Jerrod Dyson, we've already mentioned he's going to play for the Pirates as long as he's on the roster. I don't know if there's going to be a trade deadline. Harrison Bader, someone who ranks very highly in sprint speed. Miles Straw, if he just gets the opportunity, I think he's one of the fastest players in baseball. Tim LeCastro actually did rank number 1 in sprint speed last year. And then Randy Arozarena for the Tampa Bay Rays, and Jorge Mateo, former Yankee great, Adam.
I got a few more.
Uh-oh.
Mauricio Dubon. He was
I like Dubon.
a 20 to 30 steal guy in the minors. Not great efficiency, and last year that pace slowed. So we'll see if that part of his game carries over, but should hit enough, at least to stay in the lineup for the Giants. And Jose Peraza, if he plays second base every day for the Red Sox, could have an opportunity to be a contributor in batting average, runs, and stolen bases like he was 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's an interesting call there. I like that one on Jose Peraza. Let's move on to saves here. Like stolen bases, I mean, the landscape for saves has just completely changed. We've referenced this stat before. I know you have, specifically Chris, from Alex Fast of Pitcher List, but he points out that 204 different pitchers racked up a save last season, which is by far the most over the past 5 years. And I didn't look further than 5 years. That's what his tweet had, but it might be the most ever. So there's no, just like the idea of like one true closer is just kind of falling by the wayside.
I disagree.
Tell me why.
I think that that whole thing about teams going committee is a little overrated. Now, I don't think we can say it's falling by the wayside. I definitely feel like there are more committees, but I do honestly think that most managers want to get one guy in that role. Last year, Craig Kimbrell was bad. Kenley Jansen was bad. Aroldis Chapman was good, but did he get hurt? I don't remember. Like the studs, they didn't rack up high saves totals. We had Kirby Yates lead baseball with 41 saves. The lowest save total for, I think Chris looked it up. It was
a non-strike season since 84. I think.
84. Yeah. So the lowest amount of saves to lead baseball. But I still think that teams want to find one guy. I really do think that you'll find like the Rays are probably going to spread it around a little bit, which is why when you get into sleepers, Jose Alvarado is my favorite. But I don't really think we're getting too far away from just like every team that has a good closer uses that good closer.
Yeah, we're certainly not getting there fast. I think we're a little more that direction than we used to be. And that stat Frank gave bears it out. But by the end of last season, which teams were going with the closing committee? Even the Rays weren't. Even the Rays were going to Emilio Pagan consistently. I think the Nationals were because of Sean Doolittle's health concerns. But there weren't many teams that by the end of last season were still doing the committee thing. So
I think good teams will. That's probably like if you can find that guy, teams are likely to stick with him.
Even a team like the Athletics, who I think the stat is they haven't had the same person lead their team in saves in consecutive years since
Grant Balfour.
Like 8 years ago, I think. But even they tend to stick with a closer once one emerges. They just do not have a long leash for the guys who enter the season. And so I think, it depends on the team. It depends on the closer. I think the Cubs had 9 different players. Yeah. Cubs had 9 different players get a save last season.
Like that's crazy. That's not normal.
Yeah. But they were waiting. No. They were trying to find a closer. They didn't find one until they signed Kimbrel.
They paid a lot of money to sign Craig Kimbrel. So you would imagine that that's not going to be a team that if Kimbrel's effective. Now, I think you can look at the Mets and say the same thing. If Edwin Diaz is effective, or if he's not effective, but Dellin Betances comes back from his injury at full strength, those are going to be teams that do have one closer, presumably. It's just a question of whether those guys can be effective.
So, Frank, you're onto something. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make it seem like what you were saying was completely wrong.
No.
I do believe that teams want to find like even the Phillies, with the Kapler. I think that he tried to make Hector Neris the closer. Eventually. David Robertson got
Don't
hurt.
give Gabe Kapler the benefit of the doubt.
He tried.
I can't.
He tried
stand
not
him.
to make. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it was like opening day. Opening day last year. I remember it. Opening day 2018. Everybody thought Hector Neris was the closer. Gabe Kapler comes out. It's like the first day. He throws someone completely out of. It was like Pat Neshek or something. Like he tried to get way too cute with it when it came to Gabe Kapler.
He tried to get the committee,
yes,
and then had to eventually be like, okay, Neris is the only one who can really do this.
And that's the thing, is that it requires an incredibly patient hand to really buy into a committee, because it's one of those things. This happens in any sport when you're talking about like trying to do something different. And even now in 2020, when teams have been going with committees for 20 years or more, and the advanced analytics say that you shouldn't just save your best pitcher for the save situation. Even now, knowing that and having that become a mainstream idea, you still have to be willing to take a lot of heat if you use your best reliever in the 8th and your second best reliever blows it in the 9th. That's something that you're going to take a lot of criticism for, and you have to have the faith from your front office and a willingness to take that heat. And what we see is typically managers will eventually skew towards one guy.
All right, Scott. So with all of that being said, how does one identify? I guess it's not really a sleeper. Like, no one's sleeping on closer candidates or anyone that can rack up saves. We all know all the bullpens at this point. So I guess it's just, what is your process for finding late round relievers that could potentially pick up saves throughout the course of the season?
Yeah, I changed my standard for what I was calling a sleeper for this category. It had been anyone drafted 160 and beyond according to ADP, but that's too many people that we expect to fill the closer role. So, like, can you call Jose Leclerc a save sleeper? Can you call Keone Kela a save sleeper? They're their team's intended closers. I guess there's an argument to be made that they'll get more than people are expecting, but no, that's not the way I wanted to go about it. So I'm thinking of guys who either aren't already in line for the closer role, or if they are, nobody's taking their candidacy that seriously. So they tend to get, they tend to go really late in drafts. So, I look to guys like both of the Braves, I think, could be called save sleepers. Will Smith because he doesn't have the role yet, and Mark Melanson because he's actually getting drafted later than Will Smith.
Which seems silly.
Would you ever draft them both together, Scott? Like handcuffing relievers?
I would.
For the Braves, it could work because they're a great team.
Honestly, I was torn on whether to call Will Smith a sleeper because he is clearly one of the non-closers with the best chance of becoming a closer, but he's going 167th overall on average. So it's almost like he has more bust potential than sleeper potential at that rate. But I mean, he should be a good reliever even if he isn't a closer. So in leagues where that matters, I think maybe it makes the most sense. But the Rockies are kind of the same way, where Scott Oberg is going ahead of Wade Davis, I think probably more justifiably. But still, I mean, Wade Davis could bounce back and be a steady source of saves for that team. So I have them both on my closer sleepers list. I have Corey Knebel, who we've talked about a lot lately. I'm actually leaning to Seth Lugo in the Mets bullpen as the fallback option for Edwin Diaz. I know Chris mentioned Dellin Betances earlier. And Adam mentioned Jose Alvarado for the Rays. I'm actually going with Diego Castillo as the guy who could sneakily lead that team in saves. So those are some of the guys I'm looking at.
I think Alvarado I think he's better, but he got off to a good start. Then he had family issues. He had to go back to Venezuela. His mother was ill. His parents now live with him. This was research I did a few months ago, so I hope it's still true. His parents now live with him. When he came back last year, this is Jose Alvarado for the Rays. He was out of shape. He dealt with an oblique injury. He had elbow inflammation. He was bad last year, at least once the family stuff started and then coming back out of shape. But before that, 2.39 ERA in 2018. He was great in 2018. Yes, Diego Castillo could definitely factor in there as well. And then, of course, you have Nick Anderson, who's the favorite. But I feel like Alvarado was really on the rise, kind of like this new elite reliever. We'll see what happens. But I do draft him a lot because the Rays are one team where I think all three of those guys are going to have some saves. And I think Alvarado is good enough to own just to get your ratios down.
Chris, what do you think? Do you target maybe relievers that are not the closer yet, that are on teams with shaky situations who are good? Like James Karinchak comes to mind for me. Kevin Ginkel comes to mind from the Arizona Diamondbacks. Is that what you're looking for in a sleeper, or do you just try to maybe gobble up some of these committee guys like Matt McGill or Yoshi Hirano from the Seattle Mariners? What do you think?
There are other guys who aren't necessarily in committees who could be worth targeting as well. So it's really a combination of all three. I'll go after the high upside setup man if it makes sense for my roster, but sometimes I'll go after Brandon Kinsler, who might get the saves for the Marlins and who might be pretty good. I'll go after
Homer.
I'm glad you mentioned Kinsler because he's actually on my list of 10 here too, just because it seems like nobody wants him.
Yeah. I'll throw out Hunter Harvey, who I'm starting to target in a lot of our drafts because, he's got closer stuff. It doesn't seem like it's going to work. It seems like the chances of him becoming a starter are long gone. And so he was mentioned as someone who could be in that closer's role, and he could be very good, which is not something you can really say necessarily about anybody else in that Orioles bullpen. I don't know if Sean Doolittle counts. He's 189th overall. I think he's better than that ranking. He's someone I like drafting a lot this year. Injuries are always a concern, but when he's healthy, I think he's very good. And
better chance of holding up this year, right?
Yeah, it's a short season, so you would hope so. I do like taking Corey Knebel late in drafts now, and here's a weird one. Well, Blake Treinen is another one who was an elite closer 2 years ago. If something happens to Kenley Jansen, he figures to be the closer there. A weird one that I just thought about, who I like as both a sleeper reliever and starter, is Freddie Peralta, because it sounds like they're going to give him a chance in the rotation one more time. He was working on adding, I believe, a curveball to his repertoire, because right now he's basically a fastball pitcher with a show me slider. If he can become a 3-pitch starter, I think there's a ton of potential there. But it also wouldn't surprise me if he ended up in the bullpen and turned into an elite bullpen arm. And if Corey Knebel doesn't work out and they do want to use Josh Hader more flexibly, Freddie Peralta seems like the kind of guy who could profile as a very good late inning reliever.
Yeah. We'll see what happens with the Brewers. I mean, Tap AMC probably not too happy over there when you bring up Corey Knebel, but
no, see that's the AMC part of it. That's the more closers, because
more
Tap
closers.
AMC builds in the what if Josh Hader loses the closers role thing, because he's still a super valuable player. By the way, this is a relevant thing to bring up. Tap AMC, 2 aces plus Hader and Paxton and more closers. Tap AMC is bad for steals. And the best format for this strategy is an auction. Obviously it's not a points league strategy, but in a roto league, you're giving up steals with your first 2 picks because you're picking 2 of the top 6 starting pitchers. I also don't know how it's going to work in a shortened season, because the goal is you get Max Scherzer and you get Walker Buehler and you have 2 guys who have like 250 or more strikeouts, and they're just so much better than almost every other pitcher. Shortened season, maybe it doesn't really help as much. I don't know. But this is a bad strategy for steals, I think, because if you go with 2 pitchers early, if your 4th round pick is Adalberto Mondesi or something, that means one of your first 4 players is like a really good hitter, and that is really risky.
Yeah.
So I just want to throw that out there, that you're probably committing to like trying to finish in the middle of the pack in steals, and you're going with the David Dahl, Kyle Tucker, Yoan Moncada strategy, which is fine. But just want to throw that out there as we have I'm sorry to go back to steals, but since this is a steals saves show,
There's one other name we have to mention that I don't think we have, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we haven't mentioned Jordan Hicks, right?
We have not.
He's coming back from Tommy John surgery. The assumption at this point is he will be ready for opening day, correct?
I have not seen that. The last report I saw was in mid-May, and they were saying there's a good chance he's able to make a significant contribution this year. But July would be 13 months removed from Tommy John surgery, so it would be aggressive. I actually thought about him when putting together the column, and I actually ended up putting Giovanni Gallegos in it just because I feel like the upside isn't getting its due according to ADP there. Because I feel like Gallegos would have to be bad to allow Jordan Hicks the time to prove he's still healthy and dominant and able to step into the role.
Although Gallegos isn't confirmed to be the closer now.
That's true.
Yep. But Jordan Hicks was not that good as a rookie. But he is incredibly hard to square up because he throws so hard. And in 2019, we only saw him for 28.2 innings, but strikeout rate was up, swinging strike rate was up, walk rate was down. He was starting to look, he was a thrower as a rookie. He started to look more like a pitcher before the injury. So, there's certainly elite closer potential there.
The last 2 names that I'll mention are from the White Sox, from the same team, Aaron Bummer and Steve Cishek. I just do not trust Alex Killormay. I trust him about as far as I could throw him.
Why though?
If you see me, I'm not throwing Alex Killormay very far.
I don't get that though. Why does nobody really trust Alex Killormay? I feel like he's been a pretty good reliever.
He's not good.
He just
he walks a lot. He doesn't get a lot of strikeouts.
Yeah, he does continue to get the job done against all odds. It reminds me of a guy named Reniel Pinto for the Marlins, who was like their shutdown reliever for a couple of years, but he wasn't actually good. He just kept getting good results, and eventually it imploded. And obviously there are other people I could have said instead of Reniel Pinto that you might have heard of, but that's where my mind went. Speaking of the Marlins, though, one other name I will mention was a guy who was closing games at the end of the season for them last year, Jose Urena, who will likely be in the rotation to start the season, but I think he's got a very, very short leash as a starter. They've got guys they could call up. If he does struggle out of the gates, I think he can be a very effective late inning reliever.
There was also some talk about Brad Boxberger looking strong in spring training for the Marlins and him having some closer experience, but it just seemed like Don Mattingly was leaning so much to Kinsler that it would take a lot to change his mind. But that's, kind of a related point. If we're operating under the assumption the season will be short, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm not hopeful it's going to be any longer than 50 games or so at this point. like how quickly would a guy have to lose his job for his replacement to be able to actually make a fantasy impact? It's going to be timeline wise, you're really going to be threading the needle there. So
we're still going to chase it though.
I know. It's
we'll
just it's
But
not as viable of a strategy as it feels like it would normally be.
It makes it potentially less viable to target the backup, the setup men in your drafts with the hopes that they'll get the job, because
that's true.
It usually, maybe we'll see a closer lose their job after a week, but usually we're talking a couple of weeks at the minimum before we really start to see a lot of turnover.
I will say, I think that the leashes are going to be shorter, because in a shortened season, I mean, you can't really afford to have someone consistently blowing saves and losing games at the back end of the bullpen. So I'll just throw that point in there. We're going to take anything else?
Wait, before you go to break.
What do you got?
I've got a trivia question. I'll let people think about it. During the break, I found a team that has gone as long as the Oakland A's without having the same player lead the team in saves 2 years in a row. There are probably more, but there was one team that came to mind, so I went back and looked. Same exact, like 2012, 13, I believe, back-to-back years where the same player led the team in saves. The A's with Grant Balfour. And who's the other team? We'll tell you after the break.
All right, we're back here on Fantasy Baseball today. The professional broadcaster that he is, Adam Aizer, left us with a tease before the break. Adam, what do you got?
Well, since I speculate there are multiple teams, I'm going to narrow it down and tell you it's another American League West team.
Oh, I think Scott got it then.
Yeah, I was going to say the Mariners.
It could be. I'm going to check the Mariners now.
Is
But
it
the
the
one I
Angels?
got, it's the Rangers. Joe Nathan.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the Rangers every year the guy loses the job. It's just like they're tough.
I
Well,
said that
this
during the
is-
break, so I'm excited.
And an important lesson is, you have the Rangers are a good example. They've had a couple of guys who, Jose Leclerc had that one season where he was finally able to throw strikes and looked like an elite closer, and then, turned back into a pumpkin. Sam Dyson had that 1 year where he was really good. These guys who have the one pop year, and the Athletics seem to have a different guy every single year who looks like an elite closer.
Oh, but Scott, good call. The Mariners, you got to go all the way back to 2018 when they had Edwin Diaz.
I forgot about the Edwin Diaz era.
Yeah, 17 and 18, he led the team in saves.
Well, yeah, my first thought was the Phillies, and I forgot about the Jonathan Papelbon era, which goes back to 2015.
Speaking of the Rangers, don't forget about DeMarcus Evans, a deep, deep sleeper. Let's answer some questions. A mini mailbag here, fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. Let's try and do this a little bit of a rapid fire style because, as usual, I didn't leave myself enough time here. This one comes from Garrett. If there is a season in 2020, what are your opinions on keepers? For example, if a person is allowed to keep a player for X amount of years, should the shortened season count towards a year as a keeper? Or should this year not count since it won't be a full season of baseball?
It counts. Let's move on.
Counts.
It's a
Yeah,
year.
it's
Really?
it counts.
I thought this
It
was a
counts,
great question.
It counts for MLB. It counts for your fantasy team.
It's a trash question.
Are
Frank.
you awarding a partial championship? No.
Stample?
Alrighty. Next one's from Greg. I am in a 12-team AL only 5x5 with OBP. Roto, auction, contract league. Wow, that's a mouthful. $260 auction budget. The auction has not happened yet. The roster construction in this league. 1 catcher, 1 first baseman, 1 second baseman, third baseman, shortstop, 3 outfielders, 2 utilities, and then you have 2 starting pitchers, 2 relief pitchers, and just 4 additional pitchers.
It's a Yahoo roster.
It's a Yahoo roster.
Yeah. Here's the
I can
situation.
recognize it anywhere.
Going into the auction, he needs 7 players with a total of $77 left. His positions of need, he needs 2 relief pitchers, he needs 2 pitchers, he needs a third baseman, or first baseman, I guess, corner infielder, and a utility. His question is, should he trade a $26 Blake Snell for a $6 Liam Hendricks? The prices increase $5 each season. That would give him $97 for the 7 spots in the auction that he needs. So it frees up some money. And for reference, his other pitchers are Tyler Glasnow, Jesus Luzardo, Lance McCullers, Michael Kopech, and Nate Pearson. In an AL only, those pitchers are not bad.
They're not. There's a ton of upside there. That could
Yeah.
easily be the best pitching staff in the league. He could also need 4 new pitchers by the 4th week of the season. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of guys with a lot of potential and a lot of injury risk.
The
But
amount
like
of
Snell does too.
the amount of inflation that's going to happen here in an AL only league, so the player pool spread thin, 12-team AL only league. I mean, it's the prices are going to be so inflated in the auction. I'm not sure that $20 is going to buy you much. And then you think about next year, who are you more likely to keep, a $31 Blake Snell or $11 Liam Hendricks? Well, seeing the way Athletics closers have gone and considering Hendricks' career trajectory, I think much more likely the $31 Snell. So I would definitely not do this.
All right, Scott's keeping Snell. Anything else? You agree, Chris? You're keeping Snell? Adam?
Yeah, I keep Snell.
Keep Snell. All right, Dan, this one comes from Dan in Richmond. Dear Bethlehem Shoals, Brown Recluse Esquire, Big Baby Belafonte, and Dr. Lawyer Indian Chief. Chris, this is all you.
Of course, this is the founding crew of the Free Darko Collective, the basketball blog from the early aughts, who coined the term. What was it? I can't think of it now.
You're the expert here.
I know. I just completely lost the term. My brain doesn't work quite like it's supposed to.
The Free Darko?
Something fandom. I said it the other day. Now I can't remember. This is really
Liberated fandom.
Liberated fandom.
That seems like a more basketball sentiment.
Seriously, if you're a basketball fan, go find the 2 Free Darko books. Incredible illustrations, really great writing. The macro phenomenal style guide especially has some of my favorite sports art. I've got one of their posters. Highly recommend Free Darko.
If the season is 50 games and you are in a keeper or dynasty league, is ignoring the small sample size farce of an extremely truncated season and planning for future seasons something you would consider? And is it fair play?
Yeah, it's fair play.
Oh, it's like selling off your players, punting, and
Yeah, I think as long as you pay attention throughout the course of the season, you're not just completely ignoring it and keeping up with the integrity of the league. Why not?
Right.
Why not play out the season?
If you could trade for young guys who you think have long-term potential, you could still compete this year, because that small sample size is going to mean that, anyone who has upside could put together a huge 50-game season.
Yeah, I have no problem looking towards the future. Anything from you, Scott?
No, I mean, I not really. Let's move on.
Alrighty, this next one's from Jason in Brooklyn. I appreciate you, Jason, but I had to spark note this bad boy because this was about an essay on Aristides Aquino. Dear Eric, Paul, Billy, and Glenn. Glenn with 2 N's, if that helps.
Oh,
Is that Glenn Allen Hill or something?
I have no idea. I tried to Google this. I found nothing. We'll come back to it. I'm a huge fan of the pod. Love you guys. But as a diehard Reds fan, I feel obligated to warn you against pushing Aristides Aquino on people, even as a late-round power source or a sleeper. Chris said on the Tuesday pod that Aquino might have an everyday role with the universal DH, and I've heard this speculation before. I can tell you that there is an absolute 0% chance that Aquino plays every day, even with the DH, unless the Reds have significant injuries. Aquino had a historic August in terms of hitting home runs when he came up last year, but in September, he got figured out like Pedro Serrano. Shout out to Major League. Furthermore, vying for the 4 slots, 3 outfielders plus a DH, the Reds have Nick Castellanos, they have Nick Senzel, Shogo Akiyama, Jesse Winker, and Phillip Ervin to go along with Aristides Aquino.
So I mentioned that Aquino just earlier in the show, he might not be an everyday player even with the DH, because Castillo, Senzel, Akiyama, Winker, probably all ahead of him in the pecking order, though I imagine there would be some amount of platooning going on there. I don't know why Ervin would get preferential treatment over Aquino. I also don't think it makes sense to just write Aquino off because he finished poorly. I mean, there's an amount of adjusting back that happens anytime any player breaks into the big leagues. I don't think Aquino's power potential was fake. He hit 47 home runs between the majors and minors last year. I don't think they're just going to cast him out into the wild. So is there a question here, or was he just explaining to us his take of the Reds outfield situation? By the way, I'm assuming that Eric, Paul, Billy, and Glenn are Reds outfielders. Eric Davis, Paul O'Neill, Billy Hamilton, and I'm not sure who Glenn is.
Well, it's not Glenn Allen Hill. I knew there was something strange about Glenn Allen Hill's name, and that is Glenn Allen is one word, not two Aaron's.
There is no question attached here. It was basically his commentary on Aristides Aquino. Anybody else have anything here?
No, they're deep, and you've got a couple of guys who are going to sit against lefties in Akiyama and Winker, right?
I presume Winker will. I'm not sure about Akiyama. Might have if it was just an 8-man lineup, but I think there's a pretty good chance he becomes an everyday player. But I think other than Castellanos, you shouldn't count on any of those guys for everyday at bats, and it'll be somewhat tied to performance.
This next one's from Ross. I'm going to keep
Glenn Braggs.
Glenn.
Oh, he's so full of himself.
He was
Glenn Braggs,
an late 80s, early 90s outfielder for the Reds who was on a World Series team.
Does he have 2 N's in his name?
Yeah.
All right, he might be the guy. That's what we'll go with. Glenn Braggs. From Ross, I'm in a keeper league that is currently allowing transactions and trading. If there is no baseball season this year, are there any players that I should pick up now that would make an impact for next season? Waiver claims are $1 to keep a batter. It's you add $5, and you add $3 for starting pitchers. So if you add Wander Franco, it's $6 next year. It is a 12-team head-to-head points league. I will just add, even if there is no baseball this year, I think there's going to be baseball. I'm not sure that will speed up the ETA for any prospects, if that's what Ross is thinking.
No, but I think he's talking about guys who would be major league ready by 2021. Yeah, anyway, like I think the expectation is Wander Franco is going to be major league ready by 2021 if he's not already. The thing is, how many guys with no major league experience would you think are worth $6 next year in a mixed league?
Yeah.
I like maybe Wander Franco might end up going for that if he makes the opening day roster in 2021. I think it's easier for starters when you look at guys like Nate Pearson, guys like Michael Kopech,
Mackenzie Gore,
Sixto Sanchez, maybe AJ Puck if he qualifies, if he's not on a roster already. You could see Spencer Howard. You could see those guys being $4 players in 2021 on draft day.
What about, and maybe since it's a keeper league, they're already taken, but Tommy John recoveries. I don't know that this was the gist of his question, but Luis Severino, Noah Syndergaard, Chris Sale. I'd put Jameson Taillon in there considering it's a head-to-head points league. I mean, a pitcher of any stature is going to be valuable in that format. So
yeah,
don't forget about those guys.
If they're available and you can get them for $4 for 2021, that actually does make a lot of sense.
This next one's from Tyler. Hey, guys. My yearly league with my buddies is normally a 10-team head-to-head categories league. Due to the shortened season, we decided to give Roto a try. So it's 5x5 with OBP instead of batting average. In a shortened season, how do you guys feel about not targeting a top 15 pitcher, but targeting pitchers such as Charlie Morton, Patrick Corbin, Tyler Glasnow, Jesus Luzardo, Zach Gallen, Kenta Maeda, James Paxton, Lance McCullers. If I ended up using my top 4 to 5 picks on hitters, would I be okay with, let's say, Patrick Corbin as my SP1, or am I playing with fire waiting so long before drafting a pitcher? Remember, it's a 10-team league.
Patrick Corbin never goes in the 5th round in any of the drafts I do, at least.
In a 10-teamer, he might last to the early 5th, I guess.
This is the 7th round, 63rd overall in a 10-teamer.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Charlie Morton and Patrick Corbin, I think we'd feel great about them, right, Chris? Like we
love
them
more than and Scott has said he's more than happy with those guys as the number 1 starting pitcher, if I'm remembering correctly, right?
Yeah.
But I'm talking about getting both of them.
Yeah, no. If you could get those two guys, in the round in the 4th and 5th round, that's great. I mean, they're usually going in maybe the late 2nd for Corbin in some of our 12 teams, and then Morton probably more like the 4th round in 12 teams. But yeah, I'd be great with both of those two guys as my top starting pitchers.
Yeah, but then after that, like those Morton, Corbin, Glasnow. Okay, if you have 2 of those 3, that's great. If you don't, and you have one of them, and then you have like Luzardo, Gallen, Maeda, McCullers, Paxton. I like Paxton, but you better put it this way: the list he gave, you really should try to get 2 of those top 3 more than Corbin Glass now.
Yeah, but man, Morton, Luzardo, Gallen, Maeda, Paxton, I'd be okay with that as my rotation.
I love
Not
targeting
me.
Glass now in the shortened season. We talked about this yesterday. I mean, he can be a top 5 pitcher in a 50-game season.
2 of those top 3, Morton, Corbin, Glass now. But if you only have 1, and then that, I don't know, it's a little risky.
No, I agree with that. You don't want Luzardo as your SP2. That's what it comes down
what
to.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
It could, it's more likely to work out in a shortened season, though, than it would in a longer season. You're kind of leaning into the volatility that's going to happen when these guys are making only 9, 10, 11 starts, which, bad pitchers could be really good for that stretch. Good pitchers could be really bad for that stretch. And they don't have enough time to correct it, obviously. But you still have to think in terms of a pitcher's going to perform at the level you think he's going. You're still it's more of a probability measure, I guess, targeting a high-end pitcher than a real assurance thing, if you get what I'm saying.
Generally speaking, I don't know the answer, but I don't think the question is, are you changing your pitching strategy based on a 50 to 60 game season, or even 80 games?
I am.
Yeah.
I don't think I am. I think I'm just going to draft like I was planning on drafting.
All right, so you are, Frank.
Yes.
Okay,
And-
what are you doing differently?
So I've mentioned this before. I'm looking to fade the aces. I just think that there's so many weird things that are going to happen. It comes down to pitchers who are going to have the best matchups, guys who are going to just get on a roll early on in the season. I looked this up. Last year around the 50-game mark, the only elite starting pitcher or high-end starting pitcher who ranked in the top 20 in ERA was Justin Verlander. Of all the elite starting pitchers.
Here's where I land on this, because I don't doubt that's true, especially since it seemed like there were a lot of high-end pitchers who got off to bad starts last year. The winner of your league is still going to have good pitching. He may get lucky with the pitchers he winds up with. He may be the guy who had Zach Davies for the first 50 games last year, and he wins because of that. But you're banking on getting lucky with your pitchers if you're forfeiting the high end guys to somebody else. And I just don't. It may work out, but do you really deserve the win if it does work out? And are you really improving your odds of winning by doing that? I don't think either of those is.
And I would also say, maybe after those first 50 games, those pitchers, but there's a lot of 50-game stretches in a season, and you could pick any one and, kind of come to a conclusion. There's no reason that first 50-game stretch is more likely to reoccur in 2020 than any other one. I think the point is that every player is less assured of hitting their expectation. And so in that case, I do agree with Frank that because pitchers in general are less assured of hitting their projections than hitters, I think you can make the case for downgrading the aces. Although I will say historically, the aces have been by far the best values most consistently at starting pitcher. It's actually kind of stark how much the top 12 return value, the top 13 through 20-ish return value. And then after that, it's something like most pitchers, more than half of pitchers don't return their draft value between 20 and 60. It's actually kind of stark.
Chris, you can't play both sides of the fence. So what are you doing?
Are
you targeting high-end pitching, or are you waiting on pitching this year?
I'm always waiting on pitching more than most people, especially on this podcast. And, I did a draft last week where I didn't take a pitcher in my first 14 picks. So, that strategy didn't work out as well as I had hoped that time because I just didn't exercise it correctly. But I think waiting on starting pitching is always a viable strategy. And I think more so now.
Punt pitching in 2020. Who cares? It's going to be a wild season anyway. Give yourself, have confidence in your breakout picks and just draft a bunch of Minnesota Twins. That's what I'll say.
You don't have time to pivot from the breakout picks if they don't hit right away,
You don't have time to pivot if your high-end starting pitchers don't perform well early on in the season like last year.
At least you gave yourself your best chance from the get-go.
Frank, here's what you need to do. All right, I got an assignment for you. All right, so you got to get the last 5 years and look at the first 50 games and see if it's a trend. I'm serious, because what happened last year?
That just wouldn't tell us.
If it happens year after year, where the hitting is much more predictable, you got to look at hitters and pitchers.
Well,
if you think the high-end hitters are more predictable in the first 50 games than the high-end pitchers, and the stats bear it out year after year after year, I think that's much more worth looking into than just last year. The top after 50 games, pitching was wacky. I need more than that.
I'll just say this: you don't have to look it up. In a 50-game sample size, hitters are going to be more predictable than pitchers.
Then we should pivot
because
that way in drafts.
Because you're talking about a 50-game sample size versus an 11 to 12-game sample size. Just if nothing else, the math is going to work out. The hitters are going to be more predictable because there's more time for them, and they have more control over their production.
But
than pitchers do.
If you're reducing, because like I said, the team that wins is going to have good pitching. If you're reducing your pitching staff to just a dice throw, you're basically reducing the entire season to just a dice throw. And then what is the point of even playing?
It's saying that every pitching staff is going to be a dice roll, especially relative to hitters. It's not saying all pitchers will be bad or unpredictable or random. They will be more random and more unpredictable than hitters.
But it was always true they were going to be more unpredictable than hitters.
That is even more true now. And so making more of a point to invest in hitters means you're more likely to have a positive return on investment.
Frank, you show me how to look it up. I'll do it for you.
No, I'll do it. I'll do it. No, challenge accepted, Adam.
I think that they could get some interesting data here. And Scott said, what is the point of playing? I feel like that should be the official slogan of the 2020 MLB season.
2020.
Yeah.
What is the point? We'll try and figure that out. We'll talk about it on Monday. I have a homework assignment from Adam. I will try my best to find the data, but let's wrap it up here, boys. For Scott, Adam, and Chris, it was a great week here. By the time we come back Monday, the season will already be announced, so duh. Based on my bold prediction. But
we might have an emergency pod before that. You never know.
Yeah, we really might. All right, guys. I don't know how I'm going to wrap the show up.
Good job.
But this is what'd you call it? An Azer outro?
Yeah, this is another one. It's contagious.
What's the point? See you guys next week. Bye-bye.